The wind came in dry that evening, skimming low across the frozen fields and stirring the ash from dead grass. As though it still remembered fire, the road stretched pale through the hills, a ghost of wagon ruts lined with brittle sage, gravel, crunching under the pairs of small, tired feet. Above them, the sky bruised deep violet with oncoming dusk, while the air turned sharp as tin. A lone crow hopped along a crooked fence post, watching silently as two girls made their way down the final stretch into town. Lady Pearl kept her jaw tight, chin tucked low against the wind. Her coat was too thin, a hand-me-down from Mama that still faintly carried the scent of rose soap and burnt meat. She wrapped it tighter around Junie May, who clung wordlessly to her sister's skirt, her little hand trembling. The child's lips were cracked from the cold, her braids coming loose and uneven. She hadn't spoken a single word since the night their mama died. Behind them was nothing now, just a collapsing shack, smoke long vanished from its chimney, and a baby who never made a sound. Ahead of them lay dry river, but Letty already knew the river had turned to dust long ago. Don't look at them too long, Letty murmured as they passed the first porch. A man spat tobacco in their direction. No one waved. Junie didn't even lift her eyes. She just stared at the ground, clutching Mama's old thread pouch with white-knuckled fingers frayed at the seams, stuffed with a rusted thimble and a tin. Drawing pencil dulled by use, they passed the whitewashed church first, its paint peeling and weary. The wind tugged at the bell rope but left it silent. Then came the shuttered schoolhouse, closed till spring. Finally, the saloon, where rough voices hollered behind swinging doors. Laughter erupted, followed by the crash of glass. Letty pulled Junie closer, her hands stiff and protective. They reached Widow Carver's boarding house just as the last of the light drained from the sky. Letty knocked once, firm, then again, softer. No answer came. Junie shivered against her. The door creaked open to reveal a sharp-eyed woman wrapped in a knit shawl and thick with judgment. Her gaze crawled over them, taking in the grime, the raw red tips of their fingers, the absence of a man behind them. "We ain't 10, and we ain't beggars," Widow Carver said flatly. "We're not begging. We're clean, too," Letty replied, lifting her chin. "Just need a place for a bit." "And who's vouching for you?" "Mama's dead. Ain't nobody left to vouch." Widow Carver clicked her tongue and leaned in slightly, squinting. "You Pearl girls, the ones that took sick out by Bramble Creek?" Letty gave a small nod. "We're the only ones left, HMPH, the woman muttered, stepping back without offering the warmth of an invitation. "Town's already talking. Girl died giving birth to a ghost baby. Now her daughter's crawling like rats after the storm." Letty's cheeks burned with shame, but she held her tongue. Just as Widow Carver moved to close the door, a voice drifted from the boardwalk, slow and sure. "That's enough now, Ida." They turned. A man stood at the edge of the general store's porch, lamplight behind him, a biscuit in one hand, and something unreadable in his face. He wasn't old but not young either, maybe 30. His shirt sleeves were rolled to the elbow, hands rough and calloused. His jaw looked like it hadn't decided in years whether to speak or remain silent. He stepped down, slowly, eyes never leaving Junie. She looked up at him like he was carved from smoke. Then, as quiet as snowfall, he knelt and held out the biscuit. Junie didn't move at first, didn't speak, but her small hand, shaking, reached out and took it. For the first time in 2 weeks, she smiled. Letty blinked, her throat catching. Widow Carver stiffened, muttered something about scandal, and shut the door. The man rose, face still unreadable, and nodded toward the edge of town. "You can stay in my bunkhouse, just for the cold nights." Letty hesitated, her pride bit down hard, but her sister's ribs were showing. "What's your name?" she asked. "Weston Calloway." He replied. "I ain't a skinflint." Junie looked up at Letty, still holding the biscuit like it was made of gold. They followed him. The bunkhouse sat behind a leaning barn, beside a crooked row of winter cabbages iced in silver. Weston opened the door and lit a lantern. Inside smelled of pine dust and boiled coffee. A stove crackled low in one corner. One cot, one blanket, 2 crates stacked as a table. On a shelf above, 3 carved animals, a bear, a hawk, and something unfinished. "I'll be in the barn," Weston said, setting a tin of water beside the stove. Firewood stacked out back, then he left. Letty tucked Junie into the cot and brushed a hand over the child's cheek. "He don't look cruel," she whispered. Junie chewed slowly, eyes wide. The next morning came gray and bone cold. Weston was already gone, but a biscuit sat wrapped on the crate table. Letty ate one and tucked the other into Junie's hand. The girl nodded, small and solemn. They spent the day cleaning the bunkhouse. Letty swept, then patched the cot with Mama's old thread. Junie drew a little hawk with the tin pencil, silent and focused. The way she once drew Mama's hands while they sewed side by side. At sundown, voices echoed outside. "Sheriff says they can't stay," a man muttered near the barn. "Weston's a fool, taking in strays. Girl don't even talk. Other ones probably already carrying." Letty's spine stiffened. That night, once Junie was asleep, Letty cried into her hands. Face buried in the blanket Weston had left behind. It smelled of sawdust and rain. The next morning, Weston came in with a bucket of apples. He didn't say much, just nodded at Junie's drawing, glanced at Letty once, then went back out. That night, Letty slipped out and walked to the edge of town where the frozen church bell loomed. She stood beneath the black sky and whispered up into nothing, asking Mama what to do now. No answer came. The next day, a knock came at the bunkhouse door. A woman with white hair in a neat bun and polished boots stood there. "Miss Addie, the school teacher. I knew your Mama," she said gently. She used to teach minors' children numbers before they learned to lie. Letty blinked. "You did," she sang, too. "Played that bent piano in the church until it broke." Junie peeked out from behind a crate. Miss Addie smiled, soft and slow. "Your Mama used to sing a lullaby about biscuits and stars. You remember that one?" Junie's lips twitched. A sound fluttered in her throat. Not a word, but not silence either. Miss Addie placed a small book on the table. "She wanted you both to have better." Then, with her shawl lifting in the wind, she left without another word. After she left, Junie traced the book's letters with her thumb. Letty ran her hand across the worn cover. Heart aching and full, but peace didn't linger. The sheriff came. 2 days later, Weston was fixing a fence when the knock came. It was hard and cold. Letty opened the door, Junie behind her. "You girls got 3 more days," Sheriff Landry said. "Judge's orders, either find kin or you're headed to the state home." Junie's fingers clutched Letty's skirt. "There ain't no kin," Letty said. "Just us." "Then you best make arrangements. Town don't want trouble." He looked past them toward the carved animals on the shelf. His mouth curled like even mercy had turned sour. After he left, Junie silently handed Letty her drawing of the hawk. This time, it held a biscuit in its beak. That night, Weston didn't say a word, just left another biscuit by the stove and split firewood under the moon. Letty didn't know what to do with the ache that left in her chest. The third morning, Junie smiled before the biscuit came, and Letty, who had forgotten how, smiled, too. But what came next churned her stomach. At sundown, the sheriff returned, this time with a red-stamped letter and a deputy. "By order of the court," he said, "you'll be removed by tomorrow." Junie stood behind Letty, clutching the hawk drawing like it held her soul. Weston stepped forward, dust in his hair, hand steady on Letty's shoulder. "I'll speak to the judge," he said. The sheriff scoffed. "You ain't no one. Folks ain't forgotten what you done, Calloway. A man like you don't get to speak for girls like them." Junie stepped forward then, biscuit in hand, eyes fierce. Without a word, she held it out to Weston. Letty exhaled. Tomorrow, everything might change. But tonight, someone had chosen them back. And for the first time since Mama died, it felt like the start of something worth holding on to. Snow hadn't come yet, but the wind whispered of it, threading through cracks, biting through sleeves, moving like a secret across the roof of Weston's bunkhouse. Letty sat by the stove, mending Junie's dress with steady fingers, though her hands were raw from too much scrubbing and too little rest. Junie lay curled beneath the quilt, breathing soft and warm into her sleeve. The fire cracked. Outside, something creaked a shutter or the barn door. The world felt wound tight. Letty paused her stitching, eyes drifting to the worn lines in the wooden floor. She could still hear the sheriff's voice, gravelly, final, 3 days, a sentence, a toll bell, 3 days to find someone to claim them, or be carted off with the rest of the unwanted. Her stomach growled. Weston hadn't said much since the warning. He didn't need to. Firewood stacked, water warmed, biscuits wrapped in flannel each morning, quiet help, offered like he expected it to be refused but gave it anyway. Letty found herself watching him now, the way Junie did, that evening. Weston returned looking wearier than usual. Dust clung to his hair, shirt half untucked. He didn't speak, just glanced at Junie. Then at the drawing of the hawk with the biscuit. "Snow's coming," he said. Voice rough, Letty nodded. "We won't stay past the 3 days. I'll figure something." He poured coffee into a tin mug, leaned against the doorframe. "She smiled again this morning," Letty said, folding the dress. "Even hummed a little, one of Mama's songs." He looked up at that, almost smiled. "Good tune." "She stopped talking the night Mama died." Her voice broke. "I keep thinking, maybe if I were just a girl," he said softly. "Not a miracle worker." Letty didn't answer, but her eyes filled with tears. The next morning, Letty couldn't sit still, waiting for someone to drag them out. If no one in town would sign the papers, maybe someone just outside might, a widow, a farmer, someone with a quiet home and an empty chair. She bundled Junie into the quilt, left her a biscuit, and promised she'd be back before the stove cooled. Junie just nodded, eyes solemn. The sun hung low behind fast-moving clouds. Frost crunched beneath Letty's boots. She went to Widow Carver first. "I can clean, so carry wood. Just need your name on the judge's form," she said, holding it out. Widow Carver looked at it like it was poison. "You think I'd sign for a girl carrying someone else's shame? I don't need that stain. I'm 16. So was I. Didn't mean I was clean." Letty folded the paper before her voice could crack and moved on. The blacksmith's wife didn't answer. The old trapper's cabin door slammed in her face. By the time she reached Miss Adie's house, her toes were numb. The teacher opened with a smile and a blanket over her shoulders. "You look half frozen, child." "I don't need charity," Letty whispered. "Didn't say you did. Come in." The warmth hit Letty like a wave. Her knees nearly buckled. "I'm not trying to burden you," she said. "Just need a name so they don't take us." Addie poured tea with trembling fingers. "The world don't know how to hold girls like you, Letty Pearl. But that don't mean you're unholdable." Letty blinked, stunned. "I'll write a letter." Addie continued. "But I'm too old to sign guardianship. The law is cruel that way. Still, I'll speak to the judge." Letty nodded. "Thank you, Mum." As she left, Addie pressed a spool of red thread into her hand. "Your mama loved that color." Letty tucked it into her coat and didn't cry until she passed the church that night. Junie showed her a new drawing. A woman beneath falling snow, arms open. A child hiding in her skirts. The woman had Mama's hair. The snowflakes were stitched with thread. "I think it's you," Letty whispered. "Or maybe it's her, standing through us." Junie stared at her a long while, then pulled the biscuit wrapper from under the cot and held it to her chest. Outside, Weston hammered something into the barn wall, slow, steady, like a heart remembering how to beat. The days passed in silence. That wasn't empty, but full of small kindnesses. Weston left a half-carved horse on the shelf. One morning, Junie added eyes to it. Letty stitched birds onto scraps of muslin: hawk, dove, robin. Asterisk they piled like feathers on the crate. Letty took them to market with hands callous from care, hope hidden in her stitched seams. Ida Carver scoffed, lips curled like old leather, but a woman from out past Bitterbrush paused. She held up one, delicate and frayed with red thread, and said it reminded her of a daughter who'd gone east and never sent word back. Letty returned home with a crusty loaf of bread and a tin of honey tucked under her arm. That night, she warmed a biscuit and poured the amber syrup into its center. Junie giggled when the sweetness melted through the crumb. The sound light and sudden stopped Letty in her tracks. Her hands hovered midair, her breath caught. "Do it again," she whispered, voice thin, eyes wide. Junie looked up at her, cheeks flushed from warmth and the glow of the fire. She opened her mouth, but instead of words, a low hum slipped out, a tune not quite remembered but felt, as if drawn from deep in her bones. It was the same lullaby Mama used to sing while folding clean sheets by the line. Weston walked in then, dust clinging to his shoulders, paused at the doorway when he heard it. He didn't speak, but that night he left a second quilt by the stove without a word. Then the cold snap came. It started like a whisper on the wind, a bite in the air that settled deep into the bones and didn't let go. Ice formed thick on the water pail. The firewood burned faster than it should, like it, too, was desperate to escape the cold. Letty bundled Junie tighter in wool and threadbare fleece, kept the stove fed through the dark hours, and read aloud from Miss D's worn books by candlelight. But Junie's lips paled, and her cough grew low, wet, heavy. Weston brought herbs from behind the hills and a jar of onion broth. Letty boiled them with her own blistered fingers, stayed up all night pressing cool cloths to her sister's hot brow dot by morning. The fever broke, but Junie didn't rise, too weak to sit, let alone stand. Letty wrapped her in both quilts and rocked her gently, lips brushing her temple. "I'm here. Mama's close. Ain't nobody taking you." When Weston came in with more wood, he paused. A tear slid down Letty's cheek. "I can take her to the doctor," he said, voice low, offering more than he knew how to say no. Letty said sharply, fiercely, "They'll ask too many questions. Call her orphan. She is." He said softly, "She ain't alone." He studied her for a long beat, then nodded. That night, he brought a tiny cedar box with a carving knife wrapped in soft cloth. "Carve something for her," he said, "something that don't break in the cold." Letty had never carved a thing in her life, but she sat beside the fire with trembling hands and tried. The wood was stubborn, the knife strange in her grip, but the shape began to emerge, a bird in flight, not perfect, but steady, honest. Junie smiled when she saw it, held it close like it held all her warmth. By the third morning, the bunkhouse walls had changed. Drawings bloomed along the slats like secrets. Junie, propped against the crate, used her tin pencil and Mama's red thread to mark the wood with quiet, tender scenes. A girl hugging a bird, a man offering a biscuit, a hawk soaring above a cabin. She remembers, Letty whispered, barely, breathing, even if she don't say it. Weston stood in the doorway, head in hand, watching the walls like they were alive. "I seen her change," he said. "People won't care. I do." Letty turned to him, something fragile flickering behind her eyes. Her heart ached at the gentleness in his voice. "You keep giving us things, and I don't know why." He looked down, then met her gaze squarely. "Because once I was a boy who didn't speak, and a woman gave me a biscuit. No questions." Letty blinked, the fire casting long shadows behind her. She had soft hands. Weston continued. "Didn't ask what I'd done, just gave me warmth. I'd been cold for a long time." Junie reached out, lifting the carving toward him. He took it, turning it over in his rough hands. Birds flying into the wind. "Yeah," Letty said quietly. "We are too." That night, Letty found herself staring at Weston's coat hung by the door. There was a patch on the back, stitched with red thread, the same shade Eddie had once handed her. She wondered how many parts of the man were mended beneath his silence. The next morning, voices rose outside like thorns in frost. "Don't care what he's done. Ain't no criminal fit to raise no girls. Judge'll never approve it. Best they go to the state, get real law." Letty stepped out, boots crunching over the snow-slick earth. 3 townsmen stood by the barn, whispering, like foxes. Weston stood off to the side, rake in hand, face unreadable. "Y'all got a problem, say it plain," Letty said, chin high. They looked her over, then spat near her feet. "Girls got thorns." Weston said calmly, "She's got more than you ever gave." They left, but the words stuck like burrs. Inside, Letty sat beside Junie again, hands shaking. "They'll never let us stay," she whispered. Junie drew another hawk, this one bigger, wings spread wide. Later, while Junie slept, Letty stepped into the barn to find Weston sawing planks with grim focus. "You trying to build something?" He looked up, sweat glistening at his brow. "I filed papers." Letty froze. "For what?" "Guardianship. Judge gets them tomorrow." But the sheriff said, "I know what he said. Don't matter. You gotta record. Town don't trust you." "I ain't a skin the town," Letty said, her voice shaking with something deeper. Weston set the saw down. I already lost everything once, ain't scared to try again. Outside, snow began to fall light as flower petals, soft as, hush. Letty turned to look at him fully, eyes bright. You want us? He shrugged. I want her to keep smiling, and you to stop being afraid. A silence opened between them. Full and warm. Then came the knock at the bunkhouse door. Sheriff Landry. He stepped in without waiting, dropped a paper onto the crate like it meant everything. You think the judge'll side with a convict? You got less chance than a leaf in a wildfire. He turned to Junie, curled beneath her drawings, and sneered. She don't even talk. Letty stepped between them, fists clenched. She does. The sheriff scoffed. Oh yeah. What'd she say, Junie? Rose slowly behind her, thin, pale, but upright, and she spoke. He gave me a biscuit when no one else looked. The room fell into stillness. Even the wind hushed. Letty turned, stunned. Junie nodded once, like it cost her everything, but she gave it anyway. The sheriff blinked, mouth twitching. He snorted. Won't matter. Then he turned and left. But something had shifted. Weston stepped in from the barn, mid-step halted. She talked. Letty nodded. Trembling, she talked. And though the storm was coming hard now, and the law still stood like a cliff edge, Letty's heart had never felt more certain. Tomorrow they'd fight. But tonight, Junie had spoken. Mornings came colder now, not just chill but bitter. Like the air itself had teeth. Letty woke to a rim of frost curling along the window like lace. Her breath puffed in clouds above Junie's sleeping face. The child had drawn in her sleep again, charcoal dust on her fingers. A hawk's wing curling bold across the bunk wall. Weston had already gone. Only the heat from the stove and a tin of biscuits left behind said he'd been there at all. Letty didn't eat right away. She sat on the floor wrapped in both quilts, staring at the drawings, each one a piece of memory, quiet as prayer. A hawk, with red thread for tail feathers, a girl carrying firewood, a biscuit placed gently into an outstretched hand. They'd run out of ink and paper long ago. But Junie's hands didn't need permission to speak. When she finally stirred, Junie rubbed her eyes and blinked toward the frosted window. Mama's song was in my dream, she whispered. Letty turned toward her. Which one? Junie closed her eyes, began to hum a tune like wind threading through tall grass. The one Mama sang on hard days, on final days. I think she heard me talk, Junie murmured, from wherever she is now. Letty pulled her close, held her with arms that had learned strength through loss. She didn't speak. If she did, the tears might return, and she'd cried enough this week to fill the dry riverbed. But time marched forward. She rose, pulled on boots patched twice with feed sackcloth. The thread had split again around her toes. The judge's reply hadn't come. They stood on a ledge, waiting to see if the wind would lift or shove. Stillness was a luxury they couldn't afford. Come on, Junie, she said softly. We got to try again. They packed a cloth bag with stitched handkerchiefs, hawks and stars, biscuit-bearing birds, and the cedar figurine Weston had helped her sand smooth. Junie tucked it beside her sketch pencil. She insisted on coming this time. The town looked the same, just colder. Glares sharper. No one spoke. Outside the store, Widow Carver stood with arms crossed, lips puckered like a peach pit. More of your charity crafts, she sneered. Worlds. Got no room for girls who beg with needle and thread. We don't beg, Letty said. Calm but steel-wrapped. We earn. By whose standard? Carver snapped. That man? You stitching his name onto your worth now. Letty flushed, but didn't flinch. He don't ask anything from us. That's the most dangerous kind, the widow said. Men who carry silence like they earned it. Letty turned without replying. Junie took her hand. They sold to handkerchiefs that day. One to a traveler from Sweetbrush who said his mama would have liked the stitching. Another to a young woman with a tired face who didn't say much, just placed a silver coin in Letty's palm and whispered, For the red one. It reminds me I used to sing. The coin was warm. Back at the bunkhouse, Weston worked on the roof. Snow clouds heavy above him, moving like time was chasing. He glanced down at the girls, tipped his hat, then returned to hammering. Inside, Junie placed the coin beside the stove and stared at it like it might bring a miracle. "I think we bought a minute of peace," she said. Letty smiled faintly. "Let's sew more." They sat cross-legged on the quilt, their fingers moving in tandem. Junie drew with chalk. Letty stitched over the outlines with Mama's red thread. Their hands worked like worship, like memory. Each needle pull whispered, "We're still here." Later, as Junie slept, Weston knocked once and stepped in. He looked different in firelight, less guarded, more worn. "I saw you sold today," he said. "Two," she nodded. "That's two more than yesterday." She handed him the cedar carving. "She says it's you, but I think it's her." He turned it over in his hands. "A girl holding a hawk." "It's both," he murmured. Letty looked at the flames. "Why'd you file for guardianship?" He shrugged. "Because you deserve more than a barn and a biscuit. But the town, I don't live for them." She looked at him, eyes sharp with hope and fear. "You think the judge'll approve?" "I don't know. Then what happens?" "Then I fight again." Silence settled between them, not cold, not warm, just true. She wanted to say something, anything, but the words caught behind her teeth. The next day, Sheriff Landry returned. Not with a paper this time, but with boots loud and voice louder. "You girls still in here like you belong." He stepped inside. Letty stood, chin raised. "We haven't done nothing wrong." "No, but he has." Landry's voice cut sharp as flint. He pointed to Weston, who stepped inside behind him, jaw clenched tight enough to crack. Junie shrank behind the stove, a biscuit clutched in her small hand. "The judge gives his decision tomorrow," the sheriff said, voice low with warning. "But I'll tell you now, Calloway, you ain't winning." Weston's eyes flared. "Then why are you here?" "To warn you." The sheriff leaned in, voice rough and quiet like gravel under boot. "This town won't stomach you raising anyone. Not after what happened with your brother." A thick silence spread like smoke. Letty blinked. "Your brother?" Weston didn't answer. Landry turned to her, seizing the moment. "Didn't tell you that, did he? That he covered for a man who near beat his wife to death, hit him." "What?" Her voice cracked on the word. "Whole town knows. That's who you're trusting." With that, he turned and slammed the door. Behind him, wind and judgment echoing in his wake. Weston sank onto a crate, his hands clasped together like he was holding something broken. Letty stepped close, voice trembling. "You never told me." "I don't like talking about what shame already shouts," he murmured. "Is it true?" "My brother's temper could blister paint off walls," Weston said, eyes on the floor. "I tried to protect her, the woman he hurt, but I did it the wrong way. I hit him. I didn't know then that silence isn't always kindness, but I've learned since. I listen different now." Letty didn't respond. She stood in the flickering firelight, arms wrapped tight across her ribs, staring at the man who had patched her roof, left biscuits before dawn, asked for nothing in return. "You could have lied to me," she whispered. "I won't." From the shadows, Junie stepped out, eyes wide. "You're not like him," she said softly. Letty turned sharply. "You heard all that?" Junie nodded. "But he gives his hands away, not his fists." Weston blinked. The words struck deeper than any defense ever could. That night, snow finally began to fall, soft at first, then thicker, wrapping the cabin and its fields in a cold hush. It curled against the window glass, settling like a lullaby made of frost. Letty stayed up late at the table, sewing a final piece, red thread over soft blue fabric, each stitch deliberate, a hawk cradling a girl in its talons, lifting her through a sky stitched with stars. She worked until her fingers bled, until her eyes blurred, until she could whisper over the cloth, "We're not waiting to be chosen. We choose ourselves." The next morning, she and Junie walked to the judge's quarters together. The clerk, a thin man with too many papers and a too small pair of glasses, accepted their envelope without looking up. "Decisions today?" Letty asked. He nodded. "They'll be posted." At noon, they returned home, breath fogged in the cold hearts, pounding like drums. No one spoke. When the church bell rang twice, Weston walked into town alone. When he returned, Letty met him on the porch, her pulse thudding in her ears. His hands were empty. His face wasn't. "They didn't approve it," he said. Junie gasped. Letty closed her eyes. But he wasn't finished. "I'm not done either." From his coat pocket, he pulled out a square of fabric, the one she'd finished just the night before. "I carried this with me to the judge." he said, voice deep, steady like thunder echoing through snow. I told them this isn't just a girl's art, it's her life, and I'm not letting it be thrown away. Letty stared at him, every breath unsteady. Behind her, Junie began to hum Mama's lullaby, that quiet, aching tune that stitched warmth into the cold. Outside, snow kept falling like it didn't care who watched. Heavier now, more certain, it blanketed the roof of the bunkhouse and buried the fallow fields. But inside, the room breathed with heat, with charcoal dust, and with Junie's soft humming, the sound of a secret being held gently. On the wall, beside her cot, she'd drawn a tree, gnarled and deep-rooted into the wood's grain, its branches twisted outward, stretching toward a tiny figure below, a girl with braids and no mouth. Above her, birds flew with thread-like tails, fluttering like flame. Letty ran a finger along one of the lines, heart clenched. She drew that. Last night, she whispered, while I was asleep. Junie didn't look up. Her tin pencil moved steadily across the wall, shaping a new figure, a man beside the tree, coat flaring in imagined wind, biscuit in hand. Weston leaned against the doorframe, arms folded. That what I look like to her, you look like. Hope. He didn't answer. The walls were nearly full now, drawings of memory and longing. Truth layered over silence. Junie's hands told what her mouth had long feared to say. A quilt over a frail child. Two girls gathering firewood. A woman holding a crying baby. And always the birds. Letty hadn't understood them at first. But then she remembered Mama's final words. Breath barely there. Let them fly if you can't. Now she watched Junie, still mute most days, but always drawing, always telling. Outside, footsteps crunched in the snow. Letty tensed. Sheriff Landry stood just beyond the frosted glass. He knocked sharp, no hesitation. Weston opened the door before Letty could move. What do you want now? He asked. Voice like drawn wire. The sheriff stepped inside without invitation, snow sliding from his coat. His gaze swept the room, lingering on the drawings. On Junie bent over the stove. The judge's decision stands, he said, voice flat. Appeal's been denied. That girl's not yours. Letty stepped forward. And me? You're still a minor, still nobody's ward. That means you go to. Junie's pencil dropped. It clattered against the floor. Weston didn't raise his voice. You said it yourself, this town doesn't want trouble. They don't. Landry snapped. But letting you play father to two girls, that's worse. Folks remember who you protected. I paid for that mistake. There's no paying it off. Not here. He turned to Letty. You've got until tomorrow. I ride. Back at dawn. He left just as fast, dragging the cold in his wake. Letty stood frozen, hands curled into fists. I thought I was doing enough, Weston said after a long silence. You were, she whispered. But it doesn't matter here. Junie stood, walked to the wall, and began to draw again. This time, she drew bars across the girl in the tree like a cage. Something once free, now caught. Letty knelt beside her. Hey, don't draw that. But Junie kept going. A single teardrop formed, falling from the eye of a bird. That night, Letty held Junie close, watching shadows flicker across the ceiling. Outside, she could hear Weston pacing, his boots crunching snow. Every now and then, the sharp sound of a hammer rang out. He was building something, always building. Like if he just kept working, maybe the world wouldn't fall apart. In the dark, Junie whispered, what if they take us away and forget where they put us? I won't forget, Letty said, tightening her hold. What if they don't let us write? I'll stitch your name into my coat. Junie buried her face against her sister. Promise, promise. By morning, the storm had thickened. Snow piled against the bunkhouse step. Letty opened the door and stopped, breath catching. Beside the barn, Weston had built a small wooden pen. A carved sign hung from one post. Let her fly. What is it? She asked, stepping out. He shrugged. Don't know. A place for that bird she keeps drawing, maybe. Or just something that says they were here. Letty reached for his hand. He let her take it. You didn't have to try so hard. I wasn't doing it to earn thanks. Then why? He looked at her for a long time, breath fogging the space between them. Because you're both worth something, he said. And sometimes, the only thing a man can offer is to be the wall between what hurts and what heals. Behind them, Junie stood watching, a drawing in hand. It was a hawk. But this time, it wasn't flying away. It was returning, wings full of thread. Eyes locked on the girl beneath the tree. She handed it to Weston, then turned to Letty. I drew what I want to happen, she said. Letty's hands trembled as she took the picture. Inside, the drawings wrapped around them like a promise. They waited. At sunrise, hooves broke the silence. The sheriff arrived with 2 deputies. Their horses steamed in the bitter morning air, breath rising like ghosts. The sky was pale and bruised, uncertain of day. Letty stood in the doorway, Junie clinging to her coat. Inside, the stove still burned, but the warmth felt far away. Weston already waited in the snow, bare-armed, still, like the barn behind him, unmovable. But his stance held sorrow, not anger, a grief rooted deep. Landry dismounted. Take the girls. Letty stepped in front of Junie. We ain't goin'. You don't have a choice. He pulled out a folded court order. State's got room. And a cage, Weston said, voice like steel wrapped in frost. You had your say, Landry snapped. Judge made his call. Junie stepped forward, breath fogging, hand raised. In her mitten, she held a warm biscuit, wrapped in flannel. The sheriff blinked, hesitated. My mama died without help, she said. The sentence landed like a stone in the snow. Her first full sentence to anyone but Letty. He helped, she said. He gave me this when no one else saw me. The sheriff stared. From the churchyard, townsfolk had gathered. Miss Addie, Shaw, widow Carver. He's more of a father than you'll ever be, Junie whispered. Landry opened his mouth, but Miss Addie cut him off. She's right. All heads turned. I watched him with those girls, she said. Watch them bloom in a place meant for sorrow. Letty's voice came steady now. Take us, or admit this town isn't what it claims. You follow law. Today, follow something better. Weston knelt beside Junie. Still got that drawing. She pulled it out, the hawk returning. He held it up. Sometimes we come back, even when we're not supposed to. Landry's jaw worked. Then came a sigh, sharp and hard. Stand down, he said. But sir, stand down. The deputy stepped back. Landry looked at Weston. If anything happens, it won't. He looked at Junie. She still held the biscuit like an offering. He took it, turned, walked away. As the horses retreated, snow fell harder, light flakes catching in Junie's hair, Letty's lashes. A clap rang from the churchyard, then another. Applause spread, rising like warmth through cold. Weston looked at the girls. Letty didn't speak, but her eyes held something fierce and new. Junie tugged his sleeve, pointing at the sign. Let her fly, she whispered. We all flew, but now we landed. He crouched and pulled them close. Inside, the drawings wrapped around them like proof. Outside, the snow kept falling. And that day would not be remembered for the threat that came, but for the little girl who handed justice a biscuit and asked it to listen. And for once, it did.